a very long time, we have an international speaker with us today, a person who's very well known, very well recognized, and who's also come here to talk to us about something and a completely different perspective to what we're used to. The world is now witnessing numerous cases of violent conflicts and even worse, genocides in real time because of perceived socio-cultural barriers such as race, religion, etc. Worldwide, we are in the streets, public places, and online collectively voicing our thoughts. While our feelings swing between anger, sadness, and helplessness, we ask ourselves, how can we change the world? Here, I think we're getting a chance with this election coming up next week. We can change the world. Despite the chaos, black and brown love is a blueprint for healing the world. This discussion will explore how black and brown relationships across time and space have overcome barriers and helped us nurture empathy, compassion, and solidarity. Joanne Battenboos, born in Chicago, is a Ugandan-American interdisciplinary artist, placemaker, and community builder. Working at the intersection of black and brown culture, his work explores themes of migration, memory, identity, race, and Afro-Asian solidarities. Raised in central Illinois during the 1980s as a first-generation immigrant, Battenboos found the community through his love for hip-hop, basketball, technology, and pop culture. All that alien to this group here. Now based outside London, his artwork spans various mediums including painting, installation, performance art, and moving images. Battenboos' art is often participatory and celebrates marginalized identities. His work aims to make these identities feel seen, valued, and heard. In 2020, he founded the Blindian Project, a community at the intersection of black and brown culture. A year later, he was awarded a Metal Culture UK Artist Residency and an invitation to curate at the Dortmund Goes Black Festival in 23 in Dortmund, Germany. He has brought the Blindian Project ethos via curated multidisciplinary events in New York, London, Berlin, and still counting. In 2021, he co-authored When We See Ourselves, Black and Brown Love. He also guest lectured at institutes such as Stanford, UCLA, St. John's in Canada, SOS London. He graduated with a Bachelor's of Science from Lewis University and obtained an international MBA from Euromed Marseille and the University of Applied Sciences in Bremen, Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, Joanne Battenboos. Thank you.
I lived in the Midwest for 21 years. Later on, my father went to open up his practice as he started to advance in his career, and that meant that we moved to a place called Bloomington Normal, Illinois. So the center of Illinois, a very conservative, very middle class, very white, very non-diverse. It's a type of place where people may say or may make comments that racism does not exist in our community. So it was a bubble. It was very much a bubble. There were a lot of headquarters that were there. There were a lot of universities were there. Like I was saying, it was very middle class. So people almost weren't used to other things that were going on in the wider world. So at a young age, I started to play basketball. I know I'm short, but I started playing basketball. That's supposed to be a joke as well too. But I started playing basketball, and I got pretty good. I got very good, and I went to. I had the opportunity to go to university on a scholarship. What that means is that the university pays for your way to the university. Basically, they fund your studies, In the States, university can cost upwards of 20,000 US dollars a year, so they pay for you to go to school. But in exchange for that, you are playing the sport for the school. So it's a trade-off. It's very much a job, I would say. So a lot of people will graduate university in 4 years' time. It took me 5.5 years to graduate. I didn't take summer school usually. I didn't take the full course loads. So after my 4th year of eligibility was done and I couldn't play basketball anymore, I decided that I wanted an adventure. I wanted to do something. I wanted to be known as something other than a basketball player because my whole identity was as a basketball player. That's what I was known as. I very much was stuck inside this bubble. Again, that was, let's call it an athlete, a college athlete bubble. So I decided that I was going to study abroad. And this is 2001. This is just prior to September the 11th. And I decided that I wanted to study abroad, and because I was studying business, my place was going to be Dublin. So I went to University College Dublin. And September the 11th happened, and I remember that flights were delayed for several days. I couldn't leave the country, flights were taking place. And then I found myself in Dublin. And this was just before Ireland got in. So in my first month of being in Dublin, I meet this Telugu princess by the name of Sveta Madula, who's now my wife, which is how I'm here, okay? So up until this point in time, I had never had an intimate conversation with anybody of South Asian descent or Indian descent. I had studied with people in class, in high school. They were normally very quiet. They were in the corner. They had their heads down. Knowing what I know now about the culture, I imagine that they were being told they needed to study. That's supposed to be a joke too, but that's real life. And sorry, I'm gonna laugh if nobody else is gonna laugh. Thank you. So I had never had an intimate conversation with anybody from that part of the world. And so I met my wife, and she said I'm Telugu, and I probably said Telugu. Let's try this last part. But now I say Premstananu. Is that it? Is that how you say it? Love? Okay, it rhymes. Okay, right. So back to the story. So I meet my wife. She's not my wife at that time. I meet her. It opens my mind up to so many different things, whether that's food, whether that's dance, whether that's music, whether it's movies, just culture in general. And I remember when I first met her, and her parents came over to the UK. They're both from Guntur, which is where I'm going after this. And they came to Ireland, so like a lot of medical or doctors, they went to the UK. They then decided they needed to get some more experience, so they went to Ireland because Ireland had a relaxed kind of exams, so they went to Ireland, and that's how I meet her. So her best friend lived in my dormitory, and I just randomly met my wife, Sveta. And so we started talking, and she was studying medicine in Dundee. Later on, I go to meet her in Dundee, and I remember she had a friend from Guntur as well too. And I remember her telling me, just say you're friends with the guys, because my wife was living with 3 other gentlemen. She was studying with 3 South Asian gentlemen who she lived with. Okay, so I'm meeting her friends, I'm meeting everybody, and she tells me, just tell my friend that you are with my friends, as in the boys. Okay, so I start to learn more about the culture, everything like that, and We get married in, I'm going to fast forward now, we get married in 2007. Okay, so roughly about 6 years after us meeting, we get married. Now, fortunately, there were never any threats of disownment to Sveta, but it was very challenging for us, right? So she obviously had to tell her parents that I've met this guy on my own, so it was a love marriage, right? And I've met this guy on my own, and he's not Telugu, he's not Indian, he's black, and so I can only imagine what she went through. But speaking about my in-laws, first of all, as well too, my mother-in-law, she's Brahmin. My father-in-law, he's not Brahmin. Okay, so even they themselves had a love marriage, and went through a period of time where they had to leave the house and elope and get married, and then came back in. So, for me personally, I think the kind of most difficult thing is that I grew up in a culture where people date. They openly date from the age of 14, 15, but it's not seen as anything serious. It's just life. It's just experiencing life. I don't think that anybody's asking these people whether or not they're going to get married. It's just a difference in culture, if we want to call it that. Now, obviously, as probably some people in the audience will know, for my wife, the person that she was going to introduce to her parents was going to be the person that she was going to get married to. So, I met the parents, and it was interesting. We're married 2007, beautiful wedding, mixed wedding. People come over from Uganda, people come over from India, people come over from all over the world, and it was a beautiful celebration. And time goes on. We have 2 kids. We have a daughter named Isla in 2014. We have a son named Johnny in 2016. And one other thing I'll mention is, well, 2 other things I'll mention. Okay, so from a very young age, I started to go back to Uganda from probably the age of about 12 to 18. Every summer, we would spend about a month at my grandmother's house. And what I will say is that Uganda reminds me very much of him.
Everything is negative about the black language itself promotes that kind of negative thinking about black people, and we use it almost in everyday discussions. How do we change that language if we want to, remove this kind of barriers to relationships?
Sure. I mean, I do it myself as well too. Blacklist. He got blacklisted. She got blacklisted. He got blackballed. She got blackballed. As you said, there's so many different things in our language, and I'm sure that this isn't just specific to English, where there's a negative connotation associated with the word black. So, from an individual perspective, I think it's up to us to try to change this. I mean, even myself as well too. Like the use of the word slave. This is a word in universities and academics. People are trying to not refer to people as slaves, but they were enslaved. And you still see journalists and papers that will still use this, even though the AP standard, which a lot of people look to as being the level that you're supposed to use English by, says use enslaved instead of slave.
Because of economic reasons, because of cultural reasons, or even because somebody becomes a dominating power, somebody is not. Okay, there is territorial reasons and so on. And race is just one of them.
Correct. So to your question as well too, what you will often see is that the economy was I'll use the word powered. It was stimulated. 60–70% of that was Indian or South Asians who were generating that. Okay? So you read that, but when you look deeper into the mechanisms behind that, you will see that the British, when they came in, they decided that the indigenous people were going to be relegated to doing certain tasks or being able to operate certain things. So subsistence farming. So they said, okay, you can do farming, you can do it on this scale on maybe half of an acre. Whereas they knew that they could, I'll say, utilize Indians, and I'm not saying they weren't good at it, but they put them into the manufacturing, for example, positions and things like that. So I agree with you. It's not always race-based. And to your point, it can be economic as well too.
Yeah.
Around the entire world. I can ask that question back, and if we look in so many different cultures, the thought of black or being black is almost seen as the worst thing. And when I say black, we can go into caste as well too. So while I'm saying black to mean a person of African descent, it could also relate to caste. That's just my thoughts on the matter. And sorry, just one other thing. I mean, this is the media, this is the world, this is movies, this is everything. If we look to Bollywood as well too. Now, how many times do we look to Bollywood and we see a black person positively represented in the Bollywood movie and being the love interest? Is that possible?
Probably because, I'm not trying to be defensive, but probably because our interactions with black have been very minimal. The people who were forcibly taken to Africa as indentured labor,
Yes.
most of them never came back to India. And they didn't interact with India for several generations.
Correct.
And all our interactions, whether it's for higher studies, whether it's for jobs, whether it's for livelihood or whatever, has been with the white West. Very little with Asia, very little with Africa, very little with any other part of the world. Probably that's why.
But if we look to history, there's Malik Ammar.
Breaks more back or black, and I don't know if it's appropriate to use yellow, but the Far Eastern people, why do you feel brown and black breaks the most number of blankets?
Why do I feel that I've specified in the talk in general? So first of all, to one of the points that I've made, every time that I would see a couple that would be a person of South Asian or Indian descent who was with a person who was not Indian or South Asian, it was usually a white person. So it was almost deemed more appropriate to be with a white person than it was to be with a person of other descent. Whether that's colonialism, one could say that. I mean, I could ask the question, why is it more appropriate that people want to be fair? So we could talk about skin bleaching. We could talk about black people or people of African descent who also skin bleach, and South Asian people. Why is white perceived better? And God told Jonah to do the work that God wanted him to do. When Jonah heard the voice, Jonah was very scared. And he didn't know what to do. So he decided that he was going to run away. So he jumped onto a ship, he boarded the ship, and the ship went out to sea. And after maybe a day, half a day, the waves became very, very rocky. And everybody looked around and they figured out that Jonah was the person who God was mad at, and that's why the waves were coming up. So they decided to throw Jonah off of the ship, and he was swallowed by a whale. And he stayed in the stomach of the whale for 3 days. And I believe God spoke to him when he was in the stomach of the whale, and he was praying to get out, and then the whale spit him out. And when he got spat out, he then listened to the Lord, to God, and decided to go on that path. Now, that's the basis, that's the general part of the story. I'm not going to go much deeper, but oftentimes in life we have signs, we have different things that come to us, different things that speak to us, different things that happen. Sometimes we brush them off, we don't listen to them. But I decided that I'm going to listen to my calling, and this is my calling. And I feel that when we follow our calling and our purpose, you feel invincible because you believe in what you're doing. So it's interesting, when my mother knew that I was coming to India with my wife and my wife's family, and she sent me a text message, and her text message to me said, "Be careful, don't speak about your work," is what she told me. And I responded back to her, and I just politely told her that everything would be okay. My in-laws, when I told them that I had an arrangement or an engagement, they probably didn't say what they were thinking to me, but they were slightly concerned, and they were probably wondering what I was planning on doing. But here I am. Okay, so the topic of the conversation I want to talk about is Black and Brown love can help change the world. Now, oftentimes when we hear the word love, people often think that this has to be something romantic. I was going to say, but I understand everybody is not Telugu speakers here. So, as a first thing I'll say, because I was speaking to a lot of people today, and they said, "How are you here? And what are you doing here?" My wife is actually Telugu, so I will start the conversation putting some context to everything, okay? Instead of telling you later on what I was going to do, okay? So first of all, I want to thank Mr. Vikram and late Ajay Gandhi for creating the platform of Manthan. I feel that at this present time, people aren't able to articulate or talk about a lot of things, and there's a lot of speech that's being shut down all around the world. So I appreciate the fact that a platform has been created to speak about a variety of different conversations, whether that's casteism, whether it's anti-blackness, whether it's about financial things. There have been a lot of different speakers who have came to Manthan, so I am very pleased and happy that I've been asked to speak here and speak to you. I also understand I'm the second speaker of African descent to speak here at Manthan, so for me and for the work that I do, and you'll hear about this a bit later on, this is very important for me to be able to meet the audience and speak with everybody. So, am I speaking too fast?
No, it's okay, sir.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the power of walking in your purpose. I feel that people are always saying, follow your passion, follow your dreams. How do you find your dreams? How do you find your passion? It's something that's often difficult to do. We find ourselves working in jobs, working in employment. Do we actually love what we're doing, or are we just doing it for the sake of doing it? So I have found my purpose, and I am walking in my purpose now. My name is Jonah Batumzi. Has anybody heard of the story Jonah and the whale from the Bible?
Yes.
Okay, right. for those who have not, I will tell the story. So my legal first name is Ephraim Jonah Batumzi III. Okay, and I remember when I was a young kid and I was playing basketball that one time I was literally crying to my mother because I wanted these Air Jordans, they're called. They're these basketball shoes. And I thought they were going to make me play basketball better if I had these expensive shoes. So I remember crying, literally crying with tears coming down my face. And when I got to Uganda then, I saw young kids playing football in a pitch that looks like this. And they were playing without shoes. And they were playing with a football or a soccer ball that was banana leaves wrapped up to make a ball. And that told me that I'm privileged, and it told me that how on earth am I crying for a pair of Jordans when they're kids who don't have shoes on? And so it taught me so many different lessons about things like that. So another thing that I forgot to mention as well too is I started to write as well too in a replacement for athletics and not playing basketball. And just exploring creativity and doing stuff online and meeting people online and just asking these big questions to the world as a means of finding out my own identity and who I was as well too. So I do these things called campaigns, and these campaigns would be about a variety of different topics. And so I started to notice that anytime that I would see I'm going to say Indian or South Asian person who was married to somebody outside of their race, it was always a white person. And I'd meet all of these people, but I'd never see people who resembled our relationship. And so I wondered where these people were. And 2017, we were traveling to India with the kids, first trip to India, and I remember that I read an Al Jazeera article. A message popped on my phone, and it was an Al Jazeera article about African students in India, in Noida, New Delhi, who were being attacked by street mobs. Has anyone heard about that?
Yes.
Okay, right. So I heard about that, and at this time I didn't know anything about casteism. I didn't know anything about anti-blackness. I didn't really have a word for colorism at that time. And so when I saw that story, I just wondered what could have driven the people to do that, to want to attack anybody who looked as if they were of African descent. And I went to India, and I'm trying to remember where we went at that time. Everything was fine. I've always had a beautiful, lovely time. 95% of them are from the other side, if that makes sense. But one thing that I always try to tell people is that is not to say that we don't have any issues with the Black community or people of African descent against Indian or South Asian people as well too. So I know, or I have received stories from a gentleman who's Nigerian, and he was dating a woman who was Indian, and his father's comment was to him, "You won't be able to bring her back to the village. She won't understand, or she won't appreciate the life and how we live." So that was the point. Now, that's the second point. How do we bridge this issue? So I'd like to think that, or I'd like to hope that even me coming here today and sharing my story is a step in the right direction. Having these conversations, being open to have these conversations and speak to people and extending ourselves to one another is one of the ways that we can, start to break down some of these walls.
And also, isn't there a racism in various parts of that they discriminate against other tribes, communities, though they are of the same color. Isn't it one form of racism?
I don't know that I've used the word racism, but it is another form of oppression that people who look using against each other.
Okay.
Related to something which is very abstract, since the talk is about love, and love sees no boundaries, right? And love also sees no color. So it's not a question of brown or black, and anybody can fall in love, isn't it? So when you try to juxtapose, religions and cultures together, isn't it that you're trying to have some program into it? And which also defeats the very purpose of love. So two individuals falling in love irrespective of who they are, where they are coming from, right? So that should be the whole notion about living together. So I'm still not able to figure it out. Where does you fit love into two different cultures together? Because they're just collapsing all these boundaries together. That's one. Otherwise, you also need to provide a lot of avenues or meeting points or melting points to fall in love to these two communities. Yeah, thank you.
Canada, UK, everywhere. Did some of them come back to Uganda, and how was their interaction with the Ugandans? And do you still see a big gap between the two communities?
It was very nice, very illuminating, very autobiographical.
Thank you.
And it seems to me your whole experience and this whole blending project was inspired by an Indian girl.
That is correct.
Yeah. So all of us will now hopefully be inspired by you. Thank you for this talk. Any questions?
And they have names, no?
Say it again.
They have a particular name, don't they?
Oh, Northwestern Wildcats.
Yes, Wildcats, yes. I was trying to remember that, yes. My question is, there's an interesting intersectionality which is less talked about. It's my perception, I may be wrong, but I feel that the browns are far more racist when it comes to blacks than the whites themselves. I mean, this is what I have seen. Maybe it is superimposed because of the caste system, I don't know, but that was my perception. Do you feel the same, or do you feel, and if it's so, then how do we really go about creating more understanding about this?
The subcontinent of India, so Pakistan as well too, India, Bangladesh, that whole area. So I feel like there was a lot of discussions taking place within the South Asian community as well too. I'm going to say this was mostly or largely females or female-led who were fighting back against tradition, fighting back against colorism, wanting to kind of create a modern take on things, okay? So the community grew. We had an online community. We're on Instagram. We do a lot of different stuff on social. The community grew, and we started to do a lot of different things for people. Along the way, one of the points that I'll mention is that I noticed for a lot of people that were in relationships, this is specifically people who were in relationships with one of the partners who's of African descent, one of the issues that people had was talking to their parents or their family about said relationship, okay? So they would know some of the pain or the discomfort that would come with speaking to their families, okay? So having gone through that myself, I thought, you know what, I've gone through this. I can create a workshop, I can just document what I did, and I can try to help people. And so I did that. And so I held I'll call it a workshop. I held a workshop, it was during lockdown, and I would say 80 people from around the world joined this workshop, okay? Now, I had documented some slides, I had the story, I shared my story, and at the end there was a Q&A. And at the end, people asked questions, and the vulnerability shown by those people was so heartwarming because they had no shame. They talked about their situation regardless of what was actually going on, and it was so heartwarming to me. And a light bulb moment happened for me. There were people on that call who did not have a partner who was of African descent, but they may have been in an intercaste relationship, or they could have been in an interfaith relationship. But they did not have any other avenue or place to speak about that. So the community grew, our services grew, and the work that we did grew, okay? At the present day, we do workshops for corporate companies, we do workshops in universities, we create spaces for our communities to come together, usually brought together by a culture. So it could be food, it could be music, dance, etc. We intentionally create these spaces. So that's some of the work we do. Now, my main points, right? This is the good part. Okay. This love often transcends stereotypes and norms. It transcends caste, it transcends religion, it transcends race. Many of the issues I feel that we see today in the world have to do with these very things. Whether that's religion, race, caste, etc., these things seem to create barriers amongst us, stop us from working, showing love, showing affection to people. If we look into history, which my educational system in the States was not great at, is they do not teach us how our communities have worked together to achieve greatness and great things. So, there was a gentleman by the name of Paul Robeson, who many people may not have heard about. If you don't know Paul Robeson, read about Paul Robeson. I didn't know Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was an African American around the early 1900s, and he was an athlete. He was a lawyer. He was an academic. He was a playwright. He was so many different things, and he spoke about 25 different languages, and he started to fight for Indian independence from the US. So I don't believe he had traveled to India, but for some reason or another, he felt that Indians should have their independence. Similarly, there was a gentleman by the name of E.S. Reddy who was Indian born, who found his way to the States as well too, and then fought against apartheid in South Africa. So what I'm trying to say is that throughout history, there are a lot of times where our communities have worked together to help bring about change. Even in the UK in the 1960s, when there were no laws against discrimination, you had people of African descent, and you had South Asians and Indians who had migrated to the UK, who fought together for equality and fought together for against discrimination in housing laws. One of my favorite points about this is that colonialism is a word that is starting to be used a lot more now, and we're hearing this with the Palestine-Israel situation that's taking place. I feel that our communities working together, people might not get this, but it gives a middle finger to colonialism. So if I think about Uganda and what colonialism did to our communities, whether that is in East Africa, South Africa, or the Caribbean, I will say the British, because in most times it is the British, but they used our communities against one another. So for people who don't know, quickly, when slavery was abolished in the colonies in the late 1800s, the British looked to India and they started something called indentured servitude, and they moved and transported Indians to their colonies to work on plantations, sugar plantations, to replace the African enslaved people. And many times when they put our communities together, they
And in fact, we have an area here called AC Guards. AC is Abyssinian Constabulary. And there were many blacks who were in security services of the earlier kings, and they were thought of to be honest to the ruler, whoever the ruler might be. So India had a very strong relationship with Abyssinia, Eritrea, and
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. I have a different question. I don't know how harsh is the racism within Africa itself. By racism, I mean you hear of tribal warfare in Sudan or Somalia or Rwanda. But is it an expression of racism of a different kind, not just black and white, but within black and black?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you.
May I request Mr. Mohanty to give a memento? John. Sohini Chattopadhyay, it will either be on December 7th or 8th. She's a sports person, writer, very interesting. We also have another event on December 16th by Raghuram Rajan. Will be here. We will announce all the events to the net. Thank you for being with us, and we'll meet again. Thank you very much.